Well, we made it to Friday. Good morning. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop, and we've got a lot to tackle. Everything from moments the Illinois Supreme Court heard about the Jussie Smollett case and the ultimate outcome there that was released yesterday. I guess just, not to keep you waiting, they essentially reversed the judgment. So we'll tackle that. We'll also tackle the end of fall veto session and warnings about lame duck session coming up starting January 2nd. So not much of a holiday break there. Right after New Year's Day, it's back into action. But some warning that lame duck session is a risky and cautionary time for state taxpayers. So we'll tackle that as well, and a few other things that passed the General Assembly during fall veto session. But up next, let's get the latest in this past week's case against former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and co-defendant Mike McLean. We'll connect with the Center Square's Jim Talamonte to break down all of what he saw and heard during the last week of the corruption trial up in Chicago. So stay tuned. That's coming up here with Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to wake up with us each and every weekday morning. Get the latest headlines at thecentersquare.com and get the podcast anywhere you get podcasts.
Had a moment caught on some kind of surreptitious recording. Can you respond to that?
It's a tough world we live in.
That's former Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan responding to a question I posed to him back in, it must have been like 2018, 2019, about what's it like being caught on surreptitious recording. His response, it's a tough world we live in. He's facing 22 counts of corruption. Co-defendant Mike McLean facing another count. They are in federal court up in Chicago. And facing those counts, hearing all kinds of evidence. Somebody who's been in the courtroom watching all of that, getting firsthand account, is Jim Talamonte here with Illinois in Focus Daily, the Center Square, America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for waking up with us. And Jim, we've got, of course, a lot to tackle here with the case and all the evidence that continues to pour out. So just be sure you're unmuted. What's some of the latest that you've got going on up in the Cook County, well, it's not state court, it's federal court. These are federal charges with federal prosecutors presenting all kinds of stuff. What's going on up there?
Yeah, yesterday was an intense day, and a lot of the Chicago media in particular, not to mention statewide, have been waiting for the arrival of Daniel Solis. When is this former Chicago alderman who was secretly cooperating with the government for 2.5 years, who delivered those surreptitious recordings you mentioned? He took the stand yesterday well into the afternoon. We didn't know if prosecutors would get to him, but even before that, this was an intense day. Ed Moody, the precinct captain, old school campaign worker in Chicago, one of these ward guys who, got the vote out for Mike Madigan and was getting paid by contractors, ComEd contractors, while not doing any work for ComEd, but doing Madigan's political work. He testified at some pretty strong testimony, as he did in the ComEd 4 case a year ago. Then we got Alderman Michelle Smith, just to kind of give us a prelude to Solis about aldermanic processes and zoning committee issues, because a lot of this power in the city council consolidates in the zoning committee for approving developments. And well, who happens to have a personal law firm, or with a partner who did anyway, in terms of real estate development and taxes? Madigan and Getzendanner, right? So all this leading up, and then we got Special Agent Ryan McDonald from the FBI. This was his second turn on the stand. Last month, we talked, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, maybe 4, about his powerful testimony about recordings, about Fidel Marquez, the former ComEd exec, who also cooperated with the government to wear a wire. And at that time, it was just it was, I don't want to say shock and awe, but McDonald was strong. And there was just recording after recording, powerful stuff on Madigan and McLean. And the cross-examining, the defense witnesses, the defense attorneys would try to, stomp their feet, but they had nothing. Yesterday was different. McDonald, in talking about Solis and how he was approached and how this all came together, was challenged hard by Dan Collins, who is comes across as one of the more mild-mannered defense attorneys in the room. But I thought Collins had a really strong day to lead us up to Danny Solis. And we only had direct testimony with Solis. We'll have a lot more on Monday. But just kind of getting into this process, how he was approached by the FBI, and even the setup before that, how he had been appointed by Mayor Daley, and how he, again, was, he didn't use the words, but you see a lot of how these things come together with these old school machine politicians and campaign workers building the power base that Mike Madigan had for so long.
Yeah, and fascinating, too, to kind of hear some of those inner workings of how, investigators work with cooperating witnesses, and develop these deferred prosecution agreements, which ComEd entered into, and I believe other prosecutorial witnesses also entering into. But talk a bit about the FBI agent delving into how one of their cooperating witnesses' cover was blown, leading to reports that some undercover audio captured Mike Madigan.
Yeah, well, this leaked out the fact that Solis was cooperating. He was secretly cooperating for 2.5 years. This would have continued longer, and prosecutors might have been able to get more powerful stuff. But there was a mistake of sorts that allowed this to get leaked out. And so then next thing you know, Solis's picture and name are all over the headlines as secretly cooperating. Well, at that point, Ryan McDonald said, there had been communication between Solis and Madigan and Solis and McLean that abruptly ended as soon as that news came out, as you would expect. And so at that point, there was no more communication. So the wiretap conversations, those surreptitious recordings that were delivered by Solis, he was no longer able to deliver those because at that point, even the most perhaps ignorant among us would realize that, okay, if this guy's wearing a wire, I better not talk to him if I'm doing anything. So the communication ended at that point. So we'll never know, if Madigan is acquitted here and McLean, we might someday wonder, boy, if that cover had not been blown, how this might have changed. But Ryan McDonald used those words. Actually, prosecutor Amar Bachu used the words and McDonald confirmed them. Yes, Solis' cover was blown when that leaked out. And that, before that, I thought, or actually it was after that in the cross-examination. I take that back. This was in redirect testimony with Bachu. In the cross-examination, Collins made some strong points when he talked about the setup that the FBI agents used with Solis. They were setting up essentially a faux deal for a land transfer in Chinatown, which was part of Solis' ward. Solis being the zoning committee chair, a lot of power there. And so there was going to be an arrangement for Solis to get a state board appointment, whether it be Rauner or Pritzker. It started out as Rauner and it would have been in the Pritzker administration. And in exchange for essentially this land deal going through and Madigan's law firm getting the business. But this was, although this land was up for discussion and there were discussions about it, the investigators set up this deal. So Collins said, well, this was a ruse. This was a lie. And McDonald essentially been, well, yes, it was, but this is how we were able to get, we're able to get people like this, essentially. He didn't use those words, but that's why I thought it was a much stronger day for the defense, at least in those early afternoon hours to mid-afternoon hours when McDonald was on the stand, when he had been so strong, almost it seemed, bulletproof in his earlier testimony with recordings with the ComEd stuff.
But obviously, as Madigan said, it's a tough world. Something else I want you to elaborate a bit on. Of course, being in Springfield, I know a lot of the names that you're reporting on, and when I saw a name of somebody that I worked with previously in the radio world, it piqued my interest. Former Springfield Alderman Frank McNeil, he also hosted a show on a station here in Springfield that I worked with for 16 years or so, WMAY. But as a former Springfield alderman, he was also a contract lobbyist. He had this interesting phone call captured by a conversation he had with Mike McLean, who was being wiretapped at that time by federal prosecutors. And this was from February 16th of 2019. And I want to just play this. It's about a minute and 10 seconds, so bear with us here.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
I'm good, Frank. How are you?
Good.
Got a second?
Yes.
So you came by to see the speaker and talk about contracts?
Yes.
And he and I met last week, and so we're on it. And so this is his return call.
Okay, that's fine with me. If he doesn't, I understand, Mike. I've been around. I understand how busy the speaker is. So I was just trying to catch him before the schedule got full and see if I could get in to see him. But, I can deal with you, Mike. You're a good guy, so I don't have any problem with that.
Good. How do you like working for ComEd?
I do. And, Mike, I'm the low man on the totem pole, but, life is good. I would like to get a little bit more. I got a grandkid that I'm trying to take care of, too. So, that's why I'm sort of hustling a little bit harder.
Sure. I think everybody expected that with JB getting elected, there would be a lot more activity.
Yes, I thought so. That's why I was trying to get to the speaker to see if there were some more opportunities out there.
So interesting, again, to hear some of the conversation about, looking for some more work. I figured I'd go to the speaker. McLean saying, consider me talking to you, going to the speaker, and his response. But also indicating, hey, with JB coming in, JB Pritzker being elected governor and taking office in January of 2019, people thought there was going to be, quote, more activities and opportunities, quote unquote. So, again, just some of the, McNeil not implicated in this case, but it just goes to show and illustrate these types of, communications and how this, quote unquote, Madigan enterprise worked.
The tentacles of this just spread throughout the state. I mean, McLean being from Quincy, John Bradley, longtime Madigan ally, entrenched in Southern Illinois, very powerful guy, one of the contract lobbyists who Ed Moody was getting paid for. He got paid for a series of 4, starting with McLean, and for the last 3, Doherty, DeCramer, and Bradley, Moody testified, I did no work. How much work did you do? None. While he was getting paid by ComEd, and the only work he was doing, aside from his regular jobs, some of those jobs being in government, the only other work he was doing was campaigning for Madigan and going wherever Madigan and the 13th Ward organization sent him. So, and also here in Chicago, a lot of names in the Chicago political world, including some who could factor into the next mayoral race. With Brandon Johnson's poll numbers so low, there's already talk about who might be next. Names that have come up. Well, perhaps most prominent, state office holder, Comptroller Susana Mendoza. She's mentioned in one of these recordings. Again, not implicated in any way, but she was, when she was in the General Assembly, known to be a Madigan ally. Silvana Tabares, who's an alderman who was made ads for Paul Vallis in the last mayoral campaign, has been a very strong pro-police Democrat. She, too, former state rep. Got the appointment, as we heard McLean discuss in one of the recordings the other day, essentially, quote unquote, appointed by Madigan. So, and the names, and there've been other names as well, but it's just how big this political network / enterprise has been, and what an impact it has had. And when you look at the composition of our state politically, you realize that the epicenter of all this was 13th Ward powerhouse Mike Madigan.
And he not only had that power from the speakership, He also had that power as chair of the Democratic Party of Illinois, so you can see how this is all starting to come together. In the corruption trial against the former Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan and co-defendant Mike McClain, Jim Talamonte with the Center Square up in Chicago in the courtroom. Believe you'll be back in there on Monday. In the schedule, they'll be in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then we've got Thanksgiving, Black Friday, the holiday weekend. And then it's back at it the following Monday.
Yes, that's the plan. So, but Wednesday will be a half day. The judge has been very accommodating to jurors. He says, and I think I've seen this, he puts in pretty long days. The judge does. Certainly the attorneys are, but he's been very generous with the jury. We had a late start on Election Day, an early exit on Halloween. So that's one of the reasons, though, this trial takes so long. There's a half-hour afternoon break after an hour lunch break. So when you talk about government efficiency, we often think about pork barrel stuff and legislative waste, but there isn't much talk of judicial waste. But boy, you see here that the average person among us who goes to work in normal America, compared with the productivity in the judicial world, it's a little different.
It's a long slog sometimes when stuff gets to the judiciary, but it's fascinating to watch it all unfold. And Jim is watching history unfold right in front of his eyes and reporting to us. Get the latest at thecentersquare.com. Jim will talk about it again very soon because we're going into January, possibly even into February.
I wouldn't be surprised if we go into February. They've said 14 weeks, mid to late January, but we've so far those estimates have all been off. And unless the pace changes, I think I'm hoping we get done before the Super Bowl.
Well, good luck with that. Jim, we'll talk again soon. Be safe out there, and appreciate all you're doing for keeping people posted on what's going on in that Madigan trial. Get the headlines at thecentersquare.com and get that newsletter as well. And wake up with us each and every weekday morning with America's Talking Network.
The unacceptable circumstances surrounding Karina's death inspired legislation called Karina's Bill that will clarify and strengthen the law to require a firearm to be removed when a domestic violence survivor is granted the firearm remedy in an order of protection. When we return to Springfield in January, turning Karina's Bill into Karina's Law should be our priority.
However, instead of a festive cheer, what we are truly anticipating is the looming lame duck session scheduled for the first week of January. For those less familiar with the term, lame duck session occurs when retiring legislators or those not reelected return to Springfield for one final period of legislative activity. During this time, legislators are no longer accountable to their constituents, raising concerns about their accountability and an integrity to the decisions made. The lame duck session has historically been one of the most risky and concerning periods for the residents of our great state.
That's State Representative Brad Halbrook, and before that, State Representative Didich about what could possibly happen come January 2nd as Illinois lawmakers return for lame duck session. They just wrapped up fall veto session. It was pretty busy this week. Wasn't really anticipating a lot happening, but they did tackle a lot, including anticipating what could be coming up for fall veto session. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop, waking up with you each and every weekday morning to break down things happening at the State House and how it impacts you. And we've got, of course, fall veto session wrapping up yesterday. A whole bunch was tackled this week. We talked yesterday about some omnibus bills that touched on sunsets, extending sunsets for a variety of public acts, and also doing a bunch of changes with recent tax code that they implemented during the spring. Seeing some headlines on how that's impacting a city like Chicago, for instance, especially when it comes to a cell phone fee that they included in the budget, but now they're taking that back as they work to tweak it a bit more. But that could mean some budgetary issues for the city of Chicago. They've already got a whole host of budgetary issues. But some of the other things that they passed included a measure about saying, hey, if you want a name change, you don't have to publish that in a newspaper. Here is State Senator Ram Vilivalam during a Senate committee this week talking about his measure that did ultimately get across the finish line.
House Bill 5164 eliminates the requirement to publish a name change with a local newspaper. This is legislation that passed the House in the spring with 67 votes. It's legislation that 24 states already have in place. These 24 states do not require publication.
So Vilivalam essentially wanting to say, hey, if somebody wants to change their name, they don't have to put it in the newspaper. They still have to go to the courts and go through that, but it no longer, if the governor signs this measure, will have to be published. He tried to get ahead of some of the criticisms he anticipated on this bill.
Just preemptively answering the questions in terms of how would authorities detect criminal activity or fraud. First, the name change law already requires folks with criminal records to disclose that information when filing their name change petition with the judge. Second, fraud and criminal records are detected through Social Security or driver's license numbers. Those identifiable numbers stay the same when a person changes their name. An individual with a criminal conviction has their fingerprints on file with law enforcement. Fingerprints do not change when someone changes their name.
Interesting. Good line of argument there. But Republicans worried there's a massive loophole. State Senator Sue Rezin had this to say. Dan, fire away. Go.
And in the definition of who falls under this act would be people here that are non-citizens that have come over from other countries. And my concern is that people who are participating in criminal activities, part of gangs, will use this process to change their name and forever be hidden in the system, because we know how long it takes all of the system to catch up anytime there's a change. Just because they change it all takes a while. So I just want to make sure that we, especially people on my side, understand that we feel that this definitely there's a loophole built into a bill that maybe started off good, but potentially is helping people who are here as non-citizens, especially the criminals.
So she mentioned some non-citizen criminals that brought in some fentanyl and were caught in her district. She said it was enough to kill a sizable amount of people. But obviously Republicans raising those concerns. Senate President Don Harmon, leading the Democrats in the Illinois Senate, didn't buy that.
I have to follow up that parade of horribles with a question. Is there any world in which a non-resident, non-citizen with no paperwork and no connection to the state of Illinois can walk in and ask for a name change? What would they be changing? There's no record of them in their name.
No.
So a simple answered and asked question during committee, and that measure did ultimately pass. So it's onto the governor's desk. Meanwhile, the Senate also passed a measure onto the governor's desk that would eventually phase out the sub-minimum wage for workers with developmental disabilities. And here is the sponsor of that legislation in the Illinois Senate, Christina Castro, Democrat out of Elgin.
House Bill 793 creates the Dignity and Pay Act, which does the following. Requires HFS and DHS file an amendment to the Home and Community-Based Services Waiver Program for adults with developmental disabilities to increase the rate for small group support waivers. Requires the Department of Human Services establish a Section 14C subminimum wage certificate transition program to award grants that will support community agencies in creating competitive integrated employment opportunities and programming for people with developmental disabilities in transitioning away from the subminimum wage for persons with developmental disabilities. requires the Employment and Economic Opportunities for Persons with Disabilities Task Force to develop a multi-step plan to assist the state in phasing out 14C certificates and the sub-minimum wage for persons with developmental disabilities on or after December 31st, 2029. 18 other states, as well as the city of Chicago, have begun to phase out this process to provide dignity to those who are disabled, to put a human face to say that those folks who are developmentally disabled are worth more than a sub-minimum wage, to show their value as humanity.
So Castro getting this measure across the finish line, but not without some opposition. State Senator Jill Tracy, Republican from Quincy, raised concerns about what this means for the economic conditions that allow for people who have developmental disabilities with different productivity levels to be able to have that dignity of work.
This bill would go into effect regardless of productivity level, That's why I oppose this bill, is because I think we have to somehow accommodate those that aren't going to be able to meet the productivity levels that allow a business to contract with, say, a private provider like Valley House Shelter to keep these workers employed. There has to be a balance. It's about productivity. It's about your bottom margins when you're an employer. If they have to pay minimum wage, will they take the work away?
So clearly concerns there that if the sub-minimum wage is phased out in 2029, what's that going to mean for employers that take advantage of that program to give jobs to people with developmental disabilities who have different levels of productivity? But if it's all of a sudden they have to be paid the minimum wage, which starting January 1st, this coming new year, will be $15 an hour in Illinois. Compare that to other states, our neighboring states. State Senator Chapin Rhodes, a Republican from Mahomet, shared those concerns.
Here's what happens when you're up against Indiana. In the entire 51st Senate District, well, not the entire, but we border Indiana for multiple counties. Indiana's minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. From Paris, Illinois to Terre Haute is about 20 minutes. At $15 an hour, you just put all those folks that this bill is designed to help out of business, out of work, pink slipped.
So obviously, regardless of the concerns, the measure is onto the governor's desk, who indicated he would sign it. So that's what happened in the Senate yesterday. Of course, yesterday was the final day of fall veto session, and it was pretty busy in the Senate, well, at least for one bill. The House really didn't do anything. They gavelled in some points of personal privilege, and then they gavelled out. Before they gavelled in and out, you had some back and forth with Democrats pushing for more gun control measures. Here's State Representative Dan Diddich.
I rise today to honor the life of Dr. Olga Dushan, a resident of Vernon Hills whose life was taken from her earlier this week. I'll read from a GoFundMe page that was established by her friend. We are heartbroken to share the tragic news that Dr. Olga Dushan, a beloved physician and radiant soul, was murdered on Sunday. Olga, who dedicated her life to caring for others, leaves behind her cherished 4-year-old daughter. Tragically, Olga's life was cut short by an act of domestic violence, a harrowing reminder of the dangers that many face in silence. Her loss is not just a personal tragedy. It highlights the urgent need to confront and address domestic violence in our communities. From news reports, a 46-year-old Barrington man has been charged with first-degree murder in the shooting death of a well-regarded North Suburban endocrinologist over the weekend, police said. The assistant state's attorney told the judge the couple's relationship ended in 2021 over Dushan's objections to the defendant purchasing and storing firearms in their home. Dushan obtained an order of protection against the defendant, which required him to surrender his firearms. That order revoked his firearm owner's identification card. We have seen this tragic story before. Many of you are familiar with the case of Karina Gonzalez. Almost a year and a half ago, Karina and her 15-year-old daughter were shot and killed by Karina's husband, even though she had been granted an order of protection against him. The unacceptable circumstances surrounding Karina's death inspired legislation called Karina's Bill that will clarify and strengthen the law to require a firearm to be removed when a domestic violence survivor is granted the firearm remedy in an order of protection. We advanced similar legislation last year. Since then, progress has stalled as conversations among stakeholders have continued to iron out the details of the bill. I understand that this is a complex issue, but the time to get this done is now. On this issue, we should be doing less talking and more voting. Our job is to make laws. By continuing to do nothing, we're making orphans. When we return to Springfield in January, turning Karina's bill into Karina's law should be our priority.
So again, Didich making the call that when they return January 2nd, they should move forward to get Karina's bill, a bill that would essentially allow for local law enforcement to confiscate firearms from individuals who have protective orders against them. And these issues are obviously things that people are pointing to recent U.S. Supreme Court precedents that require hearings if somebody's rights are going to be taken away. And some of these protective orders, there's not really a hearing where the individual who's facing some kind of order against them has a chance to face their accuser, right? So how that's going to work out, I guess we'll see. But clearly, it's something that Democrats like State Representative Dan Didich are focused on trying to get accomplished during lame duck session. State Representative Jeff Kiker, Republican from Sycamore, responded to Didich.
I don't mean my comments in any way to take away from the tragedy that my peer just shared with the dearly departed doctor from Vernon Hills. But just as President-elect Trump has indicated that there are 1.3 million deportation orders that have already been made for residents that are still here, I'd like to point out that there are also low-hanging fruit when it comes to revoked FOID cards. Just this year, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart indicated that there are 27,000 revoked FOID cards in Cook County alone, where those households more than likely still possess firearms, and we have done nothing to address that. What we do instead is we go after law-abiding gun owners who are just minding their own business and doing nothing nefarious. And again, I don't mean to take away from the tragedy, but let's do as President-elect Trump has suggested and pursue the low-hanging fruit of those that shouldn't have it already. And let's eradicate some of those burdens from possible domestic violence situations.
So how this is going to be handled come veto session, while veto session's over, come lame duck session, we'll be keeping an eye on that. So be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell with America's Talking Network and wake up with us as we review what happens here in Springfield on the ground with reporting through thecentersquare.com. State Representative Brad Halbrook, to wrap up fall veto session, he had some warnings that he wanted to put out there for the state's residents.
Ladies and gentlemen of the General Assembly, as we conclude the final week of veto session, there is a palpable sense of anticipation in the air, almost akin to excitement being felt by a child awaiting Christmas morning. However, instead of a festive cheer, what we are truly anticipating is the looming lame duck session scheduled for the first week of January. For those less familiar with the term, lame duck session occurs when retiring legislators or those not reelected return to Springfield for one final period of legislative activity. During this time, legislators are no longer accountable to their constituents, raising concerns about their accountability and an integrity to the decisions made. The lame duck session has historically been one of the most risky and concerning periods for the residents of our great state. But why is that the case? Well, there's lots of evidence to that point. In January 2021, the Safety Act was rushed through the Senate in the wee hours of the morning on to the House and then was signed by the governor. This legislation has since become one of the most contentious and litigated bills to emerge from our General Assembly. It required multiple subsequent bills to address its flaws, resulting in more amendments than the original text itself, not to mention the numerous lawsuits challenging its constitutionality. Fast forward to January of 2023, we saw the introduction of Protect Illinois Communities Act. Similar to the Safety Act, PICA was pushed through quickly, deemed unconstitutional by many, yet still signed into law, and just recently was struck down by a federal judge. This pattern leaves law-abiding taxpayers to defend their civil rights in court against their own state, bearing the financial and emotional burdens of these legislative oversights. The lame duck session is fertile ground for rushed and ill-considered legislation. The examples of Safety Act and PICA demonstrate how critical policies can be compromised when accountability is diminished. Beyond rush policies, there are significant concerns about the constitutionality of these laws passed during these sessions. These laws not only face legal challenges, but also undermine the very principles that are meant to uphold. We have seen such legislation that attacks fundamental rights, such as free speech, during regular sessions under the guise of protecting the most vulnerable among us. But lame duck is always worse. Governor Pritzker has repeatedly claimed to have balanced budgets and created a rainy day fund. However, the reality tells a different story. Illinois once again is facing multi-billion-dollar deficits. The financial strain is largely due to continued pandemic-era spending. However, the difference now is there's no federal bailout money coming with it. The projected $23 billion increase in the state's budget by 2030 is unsustainable and places an undue burden on taxpayers without cuts. Furthermore, the outmigration of Illinois citizens is a clear indicator that these policies are driving residents away rather than fostering a thriving community. Governor Pritzker, it's time to acknowledge the realities facing Illinois. Our state is losing more citizens than ever before, and your policies are a significant contributing factor. To this body, let's not make any worse decisions during lame duck session by ramming through more policies that will drive people out of Illinois. We must restore common sense to our state's governance. In closing, the upcoming lame duck session presents another dangerous opportunity for misguided legislation that could further jeopardize our state's future. Let's not continue repeating the vicious cycle of radical, unconstitutional legislation passed during lame duck. Let's stand united in advocating for responsible governance, accountability, and the preservation of our constitutional rights. Together, we can return Illinois to a place of prosperity and opportunity for all citizens.
Again, that's State Representative Brad Halbrook sharing some of his concerns for the upcoming lame duck session, as fall veto session is now in the books. So hopefully you are more informed about what's going on at the Illinois State House and the concerns of a lame duck session, given that we had the end of cash bail pass in lame duck session of 2021, and we had the state's gun and magazine ban passed during lame duck session of 2023. And here we are now getting ready for lame duck session 2025 with all kinds of things that could pop. From more gun control laws to possibly some tax increases. Who knows? We'll be watching it, so be sure to wake up with us. America's Talking Network. Click that notification bell. Get the podcast where you get podcasts, Illinois in Focus Daily, and subscribe to the newsletter at thecentersquare.com.
Prosecutorial agreements that induce a defendant's specific performance should be enforced, irrespective of how unpopular a defendant is in the public eye. In essence, we harken back to the age-long principle that a deal is a deal. In the present case, Your Honor, there was a deal. The prosecutor made that clear.
The entry of a nollie pros is the end of that particular indictment, where they've said we're no longer prosecuting it.
So it was a not prosecute you today agreement.
Correct. Exactly. Yes. Correct. Exactly what a now pros is, by the way.
That's some of the back and forth during the Illinois Supreme Court hearing of the Smollett case. And yesterday they released their ruling essentially saying that, hey, there was already a prosecutorial agreement not to move forward with this that essentially means this case was done then, not when a special prosecutor came in to then charge and get a conviction of the actor who was in Chicago in 2019 in January and alleged that he was the victim of a racially charged attack, including having slurs thrown his way and having a noose put around his neck. He was splashed all over the media at the time. People talked about hate crimes, but then it started coming out after Chicago police spent dozens and hundreds of man hours investigating this, scouring all kinds of surveillance cameras, and even tracking down the suspects, who ultimately then said they were working with Smollett to create this hoax. Smollett being charged, going through trial, being found guilty in the appeals courts, moving on, and then it gets to the Illinois Supreme Court, where yesterday they ultimately did side with Smollett and told the district court to dismiss the conviction. So what exactly were some of those arguments? It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. The attorney for Smollett in front of the Illinois Supreme Court a couple of months ago laid out the arguments they have, saying that this really shouldn't have come to this point.
Prosecutorial agreements that induce a defendant's specific performance should be enforced, irrespective of how unpopular a defendant is in the public eye. In essence, we harken back to the age-long principle that a deal is a deal. In the present case, Your Honor, there was a deal. The prosecutor made that clear.
That deal ultimately was Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox saying, hey, do some community service. You're going to revoke your bond, $10,000, and we're done. Well, there was a lot of other things going on behind the scenes that raised concerns about conflicts of interest and such, but then they brought in the Office of Special Prosecutor Dan Webb, and he then brought charges against Jussie Smollett, and the defense saying that was improper. You're going to hear some of the back and forth from Smollett's attorney and some of the justices of the Illinois Supreme Court.
That Mr. Smollett had agreed to give up his bond, perform community service, and Justice, I think the key...
Now that's one case, but that's not the case that's before the court.
Correct, Justice. I think that's one case, but it's related because the entire basis of this appeal is saying that the initial case was already disposed of via an agreement.
So obviously the argument is there was an agreement in place, and these second round of charges should not have been brought up. More from the back and forth at the Illinois Supreme Court a couple of months ago when they heard this case.
What is the ultimate relief you're asking for?
Justice, I'm asking for reversal. I think what distinguishes this case from a lot of other cases is we have the investigative body of work by the OSP that is part of the record, where they state what Cook County prosecutors intended to do. So this is not like the Starks case from 1985, where there was some disagreement, as the Second District noted, or the Supreme Court, I apologize, noted that there was a disagreement as to the terms. We have two parties that formed the agreement, that collaborated to draft the initial statement, agreeing that this is the agreement. It was to track a deferred prosecution. The only body or agency that doesn't seem to agree with this is the agency that wasn't in the room when this agreement was drafted, which is the OSP.
The Office of Special Prosecutor, the OSP. And then you had the OSP side of this make their arguments to the Illinois Supreme Court, and more back and forth between that side and some of the justices.
So if there was a non-prosecution agreement, the answer is still no, because it's nowhere in the record as to what the terms of those agreements that would have led to the ability to dismiss those with prejudice. And here's how we can.
So your position is that even if the state agreed to not prosecute Mr. Smollett, that you would still have the authority to come back after the fact, after that agreement was expressed in open court, and prosecute?
Yes, because the agreement, the entry of a nollie pros is the end of that particular indictment, where they've said we're no longer prosecuting.
So it was a not prosecute you today agreement.
Correct. Is exactly yes. Correct. Exactly what a nollie pros is, by the way. But
So,
to
counsel,
look at it, yes. One second.
So that leads me to a couple of policy questions. So if we accept your argument today, there are 102 counties, each with an elected state's attorney who has the discretion whether or not to proceed with charges. They can request nollie pros, they can make these kind of agreements. And if the same situation were to arise somewhere else, you're saying that that discretion is going to be upended by the potential for a special prosecutor coming in, or a special prosecution being commenced, which would, in circumstances like this, impede state's attorneys from exercising their discretion?
No, so I think the answer is no. If I'm understanding your question correctly, none of the 101 counties have been impeded at all. I mean, this has been almost 6 years since the underlying incident occurred, and to my knowledge, there's not a single.
But if we're setting a precedent by ruling in this case, what would stop that from happening? Having, so a situation like this, state's attorney decides it doesn't want to proceed. It, makes the motion to nollie pros, says we've entered into an agreement, and then the judge accepts it, and then whether it's a member of the public, by way of the public outcry that we saw here, or a victim's family or something, then find a way to say, we're going to try and proceed with this, a special prosecution. We're going to resurrect these charges.
Yeah, there's nothing special about this case. I would posit the following: nothing has. The hypothetical that you've just raised has been in existence since at least 1985 because of Sparks and Boyd's case. Nothing has changed. This is not setting some sort of new precedent. The concept of a nollie pros and what it means as it relates to finality, what's on the record and what's not on the record, that if this court were to rule in appellant's favor, that's where things would change, where this would be a total sea change as it relates to Illinois law.
Well, what did the justices ultimately do? Let's go ahead and take a look at that conclusion from the 32-page ruling. We are aware that this case has generated significant public interest and that many people were dissatisfied with the resolution of the original case and believe it to be unjust. Nevertheless, what would be more unjust than the resolution of any one criminal case would be a holding from this court that the state was not bound to honor agreements upon which people have determinedly relied. As the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania recently stated when enforcing a prosecutorial promise not to prosecute, it cannot be gainsaid that society holds a stronger interest in the prosecution of crimes. It is also true that no such interest, however important, ever can eclipse society's interest in ensuring that the constitutional rights of the people are vindicated. Society's interest in prosecution does not displace the remedy due to constitutionally aggrieved persons. That court further noted that the consequences of failing to enforce prosecutorial promises when a defendant has relied on them to his detriment. Contrary results, quotes, would be patently untenable. It would violate long-cherished principles of fundamental fairness. It would be antithetical to and coercive of the integrity and functionality of the criminal justice system that we strive to maintain. So therefore, we reverse the judgment of the appellate court, reverse the judgment of the circuit court, and remand the case with directions to the circuit court to enter a judgment of dismissal. So that means the case against Jussie Smollett is over. And what twists and turns that went. If you recall, when he was sentenced to jail, he served, 6 days and was released. But before he went in, he put his fist up in the air and said he is not suicidal. He's not suicidal. And if he was guilty, he would have said something earlier that he was taken behind closed doors. Well, now he's free of these charges. So that's the latest from the Illinois Supreme Court. All right, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Wake up with us. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. Well, it's been a long week and pretty long Friday program. Hopefully you guys are better informed, waking up with some background and details and things coming up. We'll be back at it next week. Of course, heading into a holiday week. Thanksgiving's coming up, so we're going to be off Thursday, Friday. Then we'll be back the following Monday, and then you've got Christmas, and the following month, New Year's, and all of that. So have yourselves a wonderful weekend. We'll see you back here tomorrow. No, not tomorrow. Monday. All right, so yeah, Monday. So we'll see you then. It's Illinois in Focus Daily.